In the last 6 months, and this is not a joke, this is not a drill, this is what wakes me up at night, less than 5% of stool samples we've analyzed, less than 5% have Bifidobacteria.
No way.
And 1 had lactobacillus.
Is there the chance that Bifidobacteria is the secret to life?
So now let me ask you, what happens when you lose Bifidobacteria and lactobacillus? Your energy is messed up, you're tired. Humanity is going extinct. That's a reality.
The fastest growing, most accelerating perspective we have in this world is that your gut health may be affecting things you never imagined.
Yes. So let me explain. Immunity is in your gut.
Do vaccines have a history of hurting the microbiome?
We've stopped the art of medicine and have started a corporate medicine. I honestly did not know what I was stepping into.
What do you think you stepped into?
Shit. At all levels.
Dr. Sabine Hazan, I want to thank you for joining us on the MAHA podcast. First of all, your work has been amazing. So many people, I think, are getting really excited by the things you've been sharing over the last couple of years. But for anyone that maybe has somehow missed all the great podcast interviews you've done, just give me a little sense of your background.
I'm a gastroenterologist that started doing clinical trials for pharmaceutical company. I brought drugs to market for pharma. And when pharma became interested in microbiome pills or pill poop, well, let's put it this way, one could say that I went rogue because I felt that we were just giving out pill poop without understanding the microbiome. And my fear was what happens when you globalize the world and you give that microbiome to everybody, thinking that that's the microbiome.
For people just like people like pill poop, like you do fecal transplants or something that's part of what you do, taking someone's feces and putting it inside. Where do you put it, by the way?
Put it, so there's different ways to put it. So there's, data that shows that in a capsule and then it's supposed to reach the cecum.
So you swallow it.
You could swallow it. You could do it by NG tube. You could do an enema. You could put it via sigmoidoscopy. The best method that I have found for me anyways, and that a few of my colleagues have found, is via colonoscopy.
Okay.
And so you go all the way to the end of the colon. So remember, the colon moves forward except in the cecum, which is from the terminal ileum to this is the cecum. So the cecum goes backwards. So microbes tend to stay there, and that's almost the motherboard, right? So if you implant something in there, it's not going to move forward. You're not going to evacuate it. It's going to stay there. Okay. Also, the appendix is the original appendage where good microbes used to be stored. So it has a purpose. And so I like to go into the cecum and essentially repopulate there. So fecal transplant is that process of taking stools. What we've discovered through fecal transplant is that, first of all, it's amazing for C. diff, the bacteria that basically you get when you have antibiotics and you have diarrhea, right? So patients that come in, have been in the hospital, took antibiotics, get diarrhea, they have C. diff. And so forever we were killing C. diff with antibiotics, vancomycin, Flagyl, different antibiotics, and it was all about killing. What I've come to realize when we started looking at what are we doing in C. diff, why is fecal transplant even working? What we discovered is with antibiotics, we're killing the diversity of the microbiome. So we're trying to kill C. diff, but we get a reoccurrence because we missed C. diff and we killed everything else. So fecal transplant is essentially the process of replanting new microbes. What was happening was when we started doing fecal transplant, and we were all following Dr. Tom Barodi, so fecal transplant started 5th century China.
Really?
Yeah, they used to call it the yellow soup because they figured out that if patients had this diarrhea, they would give them feces in a yellow soup and they would get better. And so the process over the years kind of was not really, fun. Nobody wants to think about swallowing feces.
Right.
But in the 50s, Dr. Einsman had 2 patients with C. diff. And he said, you know what? Why don't I try fecal transplant? And he basically did an enema of poop. And then it resolved. They improved. So from there, Dr. Barodi took it to the next level, started doing hundreds, thousands of patients, and started seeing different things happening. Autism improving in some kids, Parkinson's in some people, etc. So he started seeing something. So he started publishing. He was an independent gastroenterologist in Australia and started publishing a lot of his work. And a lot of the people my generation, like 30 years ago, we started kind of paying attention to him. Neil Stolman in particular was my buddy who was a year ahead of me in fellowship and essentially was, taken by this. And he would take me around the posters and say, the future is in sh.t. And I said, please don't make me play with it. This is disgusting. If the colonoscopy is not clean, I'm out of it. So what happened is I went the route of doing clinical trials for pharma on C. diff. He went the route of publishing the data on C. diff, and he was speaking at all these conferences. And I would see him speak, in front of, hundreds of people. And he would always say, well, if I was in the room, he would always say, well, Dr. Hazan doesn't believe in the whole field, but here's the data. So finally what happened was, as I was doing these clinical trials with pharma and I wasn't succeeding in fixing...
And you're doing clinical trials on other drugs too, right?
Yeah, and other drugs. Yeah. All sorts of drugs. Yeah,
Okay.
Remicade, all sorts of drugs. Okay. Cholesterol pills, psoriasis, biologics, all sorts of drugs.
Okay.
So when I was doing C. diff and a patient would not resolve, I would have to fall on fecal transplant. And I remember the first time I called him, I said, how do you do this? And he basically just said, you take stools, you put it in a blender, you figure it out. So the whole time, it became, okay, well, I'm supposed to mimic the microbiome, which is anaerobic. How do I do that? I'm supposed to keep it in the colon and not evacuate it. So I basically figured out my own little technique, but around the country, other doctors were doing the same thing. Sahil Khanna at Mayo Clinic, Jessica Allegretti, Zain Kassam, all these doctors were starting, Colleen Kelly. And when I improved the case, I went back and looked at all my data. What did I improve? And one case in particular was a guy with C. diff who had Alzheimer's. And I gave him a stool bank, stools to begin with, because that's what was available. And he didn't respond. Whether the stool was transported, got killed in the transportation, something happened, but it didn't respond. So I decided to give him his wife's poop, who was super aware, really strong woman. And he comes back a month later and he starts to talk to me and remembering things. And even corrected my history. He said, no, I told you that last time. I was like, what? So I had tried to get this guy in a clinical trial for Alzheimer's, but he was too severe. So his mini-mental status, which is how we monitor Alzheimer's, was 21. So I brought him back.
What does 21 mean?
So you have a questionnaire. Yeah, it's a scale. It's 21 out of 30.
Okay.
So you ask questionnaires like what day is it? Is it summer? Is it winter? It's basically questionnaires you ask people to see their mental status. Then you give them a picture of a square with a triangle, almost like a house juxtaposed, and you ask them to redraw the exact same picture, right? So when I evaluated him, he could barely draw. He was 21 was his score. So when you tabulate all the questions, you find a score. So 21 was his score. So I basically said, fine, he can't qualify the study. And then he had C. diff. Then we did fecal transplant. And when he came back, he started remembering things during my history. I said, wait a minute, hold on. Let me take the questionnaire. Let me re-ask you questions. And sure enough, he went from 21 to 25. I called his neurologist. I said, by the way, did you do a mini mental status on this guy? He goes, yeah, it was surprising. It was like 25, 26. I go, wow, that's incredible. So 6 months later, the guy comes back. He's now golfing. He's eating. He's aware, etc. So I basically said, let's redo the mini mental status. 29. The two houses that I told you, perfectly drawn. This article it took me years to publish it. They didn't believe it because the journal said, no, we don't believe it. You didn't question properly. I said, I have two unbiased questionnaires here
Yeah.
from the neurologist that found the same, independent of each other. And I said, tell you what, I'll send you the pictures before and after. So I sent them the pictures of the questionnaire before and after, and then they published the case. So that was a huge opening for me, because then I said, well, what's changed in Alzheimer's? Why
Right.
is
Why
this,
would
what microbe
what would that have to do
causes?
with an amyloid plaque?
Yeah.
We're a long way
From the
them.
amyloid plaque. And here's the other thing, convincing. I had a neurologist in town, Dr. Sheldon Jordan, who works at UCLA and USC, brilliant guy. He's an interventional. He was blown away. He looked at it. He goes, yep, this is the future. He goes, but don't forget the brain. I go, I would never forget the brain, because here's the thing. You can't fix the gut without fixing the brain. You can't fix the brain without fixing the blood, without fixing the connection, etc. So the whole body is really, we've specialized as doctors into this field, but we forget that it's all joined together. So that case opened up the door for me to ask the question, because here's the thing. My question was, if there's a microbe for Alzheimer's, then somebody could just put that microbe in a yogurt, right?
So explain how you see it that way. If there's a microbe, because it just seems to me, I just heard that story. Just so if I have a good balanced, microbiome, then I don't get Alzheimer's or whatever. I sort of generalize it, but are you saying that there's like a microbe?
There's a signature microbiome, and there's a I shouldn't say one microbe. I should say one microbe for that person that causes toxicity, that secretes toxins. We're not there yet.
And a toxin specific to Alzheimer's and not, let's say, some other diabetes or some other illness.
Correct. So when you see, so I went to Dr. Sidney Feingold, who basically started me on this, and Dr. Feingold said, look, I've been culturing Alzheimer, stools of patients with Alzheimer's. He had a whole freezer of stools that he was culturing. And he said, when you get your lab and you get the sequencer, you're going to figure out what I found in cultures. So he gave me this protocol and he said to me, nobody in pharma is interested in it. And he wrote the book on anaerobic infections, by the way. So I took the protocol, put it in a safe. I said, I'll get back to it if I open a lab, right? And so what we started seeing is, yeah, indeed, there are, but in that patient that I had collected the stools before and after, there was a microbe that possibly was secreting toxins. And when we restored a different microbiome, that microbe disappeared, and then the good microbes started growing up, and then the balance kind of came on. So that's basically what we saw with this case. So that case opened up the door to the discussions, right? To discussions between GI. Another case that opened up the door for me was fecal transplant and metastatic mesothelioma. So a woman came to me, mother of a doctor, and her husband was a physician, and they begged me to do fecal transplant on the mom. And she had a grandson that was perfectly healthy. So the mom, we had to get the FDA involved. So I have a portal with the FDA to submit new drug protocols if I want to, right? So I submitted every fecal transplant you want to do that's not C. diff, you have to involve the FDA. So we submitted one IND basically to the FDA. It initially didn't want to approve it because they said, it's cancer. What are you doing? You could be killing the patient. And I said, frankly, I could teach the mom how to do it at home and drink her son's poop, and you have no jurisdiction. I'm giving you the key to the kingdom to see what's happening here. So they approved it within 36 hours, which is unheard of. At the time was unheard of for the FDA. Mm-hmm. So we get this case. The mom had no appetite, weight loss, didn't have any interest. I mean, in life, she was dying. Hemoglobin was very low. She probably had about a week or 2 weeks to live. And I gave her the grandson. All of a sudden, she's eating. She's gaining weight. Her hemoglobin's improving. She starts craving chicken nuggets and French fries like her grandson was eating. So that case kind of told me something, right? So that was so then you start going, wait, microbes play a role with cancer. Is cancer a microbe? I mean, if you think about HPV and cervical cancer, right? It's linked together. If you think about EBV and Burkitt's lymphoma, if you think about H. pylori and cancer, stomach cancer, right? So so the question became, is every cancer linked to a bug or a microbe that we have no idea what it is? And therefore, should we be focusing on finding the microbe that's linked with colon cancer, for example, the microbe that's linked with pancreatic cancer, and then eradicating that cancer and then restoring the microbiome? Is that the way of the future? I think so. I think in the future, it's probably, we're going to have ways to predict who's going to have cancer before they have cancer while it's at the microbiome level. That's what I see anyways. That's my vision of the future in medicine. So that was an amazing case.
I want to discuss something that you and I have talked about before, but I don't think a lot of people know it. And it's what brings me to this very specific perspective too, which is Dr. Andrew Wakefield.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's why I'm here. I'm doing this podcast.
Yes.
I don't.
Yes.
I ultimately would probably still be working at CBS or doing something else if I hadn't gotten on this sort of vaccine and autism conversation. And so what happened was there was a whistleblower inside the CDC. I wanted to tell that story. I was searching for how I tell them that. Whistleblower was saying we're committing scientific fraud in the vaccine safety studies, especially the MMR autism study. And in my journey to find how to tell that story, I run into Andrew Wakefield, who's like, I've been working on that film for a year and a half. I have all of his interviews.
Right.
I've got the whistleblower, the whole thing.
Amazing. Yeah.
So then I was like, oh my God, am I actually going to like work with Dr. Andrew Wakefield, the guy that's probably, I mean, there's textbooks in England that when it describes medical fraud, it's got Andrew Wakefield's picture on it.
I know.
Right?
I know.
He's also like in tests, if you're going to graduate in like certain science tests, especially in Europe.
Yes.
They bring him up. So that's this guy. And I'm just thinking, my God, I want this story because I think it's a very important story. But if I'm going to tell this story, get involved in this documentary, I'm going to be working with this guy, which will be a career killer for me.
Yes, and it is.
But I then did an investigation to Andy, and I want to go over it because a lot of people miss some of the details of what that story. All they hear is that fraudulent doctor that did the fraudulent study on the blah, blah, blah.
And he never said the MMR causes autism. If you listen to everything he's ever said, and if you read his papers, he never said that.
Yeah.
So he just questioned. He just asked what's happening. So, the moment you stop asking questions in science, you've killed science and you've killed medicine, frankly.
So for people that don't know the story, and I know you do, and you can fill in any detail I missed, but he's a gastroenterologist. His specialty is Crohn's disease. He's written, I think, 40 or 50 papers at that point on Crohn's disease. He's also found some interesting finding that Crohn's disease looks like it could be triggered by someone who's had the measles. He's finding measles virus in the gut biome of people that are suffering from Crohn's. And Crohn's disease used to be something that Ashkenazi Jewish old men mostly had to deal with. And a parent of an autistic child called on one of these studies that he'd written about. And they're like, I feel like you're describing my child. That my child has the same sort of gut issue you're describing, but it wasn't from measles. It was right after a measles vaccine. And would you look at my child? And by the way, my child got autism from that vaccine.
Wow.
And Andy said, well, I don't know anything about autism. You're calling the wrong person. What the heck does this have to do with me? I'm a gastroenterologist. And so I think he eventually agreed to just check the child out. And sure enough, had a very unusual gut dysbiosis. She starts calling friends and other people, like, bring your kids here. So he ends up looking at 12 kids. Right? 12 children. And people say the study was so small. It's a case study. It's a lack of understanding. It's a case study. It's I know nothing about this.
Yes.
A bunch of parents have lined up. Let me look at your 12 kids. Let's see if there's something here that's similar.
100%.
Right?
Yeah, you have to look. Yeah.
And so in the story, he ends up, and it's all about the gut. This is what people don't realize. They weren't coming and saying, my child's autistic from a vaccine. What they're saying is, my child's autistic, but they have a gut problem that seems to be similar amongst our kids that they didn't have prior to the moment they had autism. So why is autism, which is supposed to be a neurological mental disorder of some kind, why is it coming at the same time as some gut thing?
Right.
That was what was studied in the paper. Like,
Right.
is there a novel gut disease that's somehow associated with autism? Super fascinating. It's so annoying that no one in the world knows that that's what the study is about.
Right.
The study was not, does the MMR cause autism?
No, I
No.
know.
The study is there a gut issue that somehow goes with the brain? And we could get into all the details of how they studied that or how the fraud, but what was really when I was working with him, and by the way, there were several things about that. I'd always heard that fraudulent doctor that created the fraud and blah, blah, blah. And then you go and read the study and there's like 12 world-renowned scientists on it with him that all signed off on it.
Right.
And I'm like, if this guy, if you're going to commit a fraud, how do you do it and get 12 of your peers that are the best in their field of pediatric, gut issue, whatever, and sign off? And like, it to me, I was like, something's wrong with this story.
And here's what happened is that basically he was challenging an industry and a business.
Yeah.
And that's the reality. And so they had to terminate that narrative. And so he was an example of what not to do for other doctors. So imagine you're the academic doctor that sees this, but you say, oh, taboo. I'm not going to do it because I don't want to end up like Dr. Wakefield, right? For me, I never really, I didn't go into medicine, because of the glory of medicine or because of the glory of being in academics or anything like that, or publishing or any of that. To me, I went into medicine to understand life and understand where do we go after we die. So to me, none of that matters. I also don't have an ego. So if they want to trash me, go ahead, make my day, And that's why I wrote the book, Let's Talk SH.T, because it's like, I could be full of it. I could know it. I don't care.
Yeah.
I think we need to talk about it and we need to start becoming open-minded about it and asking questions. He raised a very important point, and that is autism an extraintestinal manifestation of Crohn's disease? And that's a very good point because obviously Crohn's disease is not just to the intestine. You've got people that have arthritic problems, they've got rashes, they've got, so Crohn's disease, there's a lot of extraintestinal manifestations to Crohn's that make it Crohn's disease. You've got mental illness, that's part of Crohn's disease too. So is autism an extraintestinal manifestation of Crohn's disease that we're missing? And let me tell you, because I've done a lot of clinical trials for pharma, and one particular clinical trial that I did was with Dr. Tom Barodi, who was the scientist behind a Red Hill study. It was Mycobacteria paratuberculosis. There was a question whether Crohn's disease is from a microbe that cows have in their guts that's similar to Johne's disease. So if you look at the cow's colon of Johne's disease, the cows are cachectic, they're having intense diarrhea. These cows that have that. When you look at the colon, they have a bacteria called Mycobacteria paratuberculosis. There was a question as to whether these cows that are cachectic have this bacteria, and therefore when a kid is drinking milk or eating a piece of that cow that was not properly processed, they're getting that bacteria, and essentially the bacteria, that microbe is a culprit of Crohn's disease, right? So what happened is I did that clinical trial, and they were giving quadruple antibiotic for that clinical trial. What I noticed in my clinical trial when I was doing it is that 1/3 of the patients actually resolved. No more Crohn's, 1/3 of my patients ended up, and even though it's a small study, we never published, it was part of the trial, my observation, right? That's what you do when you're doing clinical trials.
Were you trialing the use of antibiotics?
We were trying the use of quadruple antibiotics for the treatment of Mycobacteria paratuberculosis.
To cure Crohn's?
To cure Crohn's, yes.
Okay, interesting.
So, here we have 1/3 of the patients basically resolved. Like, I've yet to see them. 1/3 get C. diff. They need to be treated. We give them antibiotics, doesn't work. I do fecal transplant, and it was actually 2 patients, so it was not that huge amount of number. But one gets improved with fecal transplant, the other one doesn't. And then the rest of the patients that were on the trial basically went on to biologics. Okay, so when I started looking at that, because remember, we're in the clinical trial business to make observations to advance science, right? So I'm looking at this and I go, maybe Mycobacteria paratuberculosis is possible in one subset of those patients with Crohn's. Maybe genetic predisposition. Maybe that's why the Ashkenazi Jews have it, genetic predisposition, and therefore biologics is the way. And maybe
biologics, what do you mean by that?
Remicade, drugs like that, Humira, Remicade, Stelara, all those drugs. From there, when you see the people that got C. diff from the antibiotics, and one of them responded to fecal transplant, that brought me the question.
Did it get rid of the Crohn's, but then they had a resulting C. diff issue?
So the people that resolved Crohn's,
first group resolved.
First group resolved.
Next group gets C. diff on top of their Crohn's disease?
Correct.
Okay.
And that's a nightmare to fix.
I would imagine
because, So I'm here as the GI doctor, and I knew taking on this protocol that this was going to be a risky protocol. Okay. You're giving antibiotics to an immunosuppressed population. You're playing Russian roulette, right?
Yeah.
So what happened was I decided to do fecal transplant on both, but one of them did not respond and one of them responded. Come to find out that the one that didn't respond was on so many medications. He was taking huge amount of antibiotics under natural, because there's a lot of products that are out there that say, oh, well, it's a natural product. But then when you read it, it's really an antibiotic, right? So this guy was on a constant chronic use of antibiotics and had C. diff, etc. And then the other kid responded. So the question became, is fecal transplant improving a leaky gut, a gut dysbiosis, and that Crohn's? But more importantly, what I came to find out, and I became friends with Dr. Barodi because Dr. Barodi improved Crohn's disease with fecal transplant. And remember, he was the guy that was also part of that MAP treatment. In fact, he was working on a MAP vaccine for Crohn's disease. So now you take all this, and then you start reading Arthur Krigsman's data from autism. And I, as I got involved in autism, I started going to all these meetings and listening to doctors. And what really, and I saw the kids that Dr. Krigsman had improved, and he used biologics on them. So I said to him, I go, wait, you mean you resolved inflammatory bowel disease with biologics? He goes, yeah, not in everyone, but in some patients. So in my mind, I started thinking of autism as also multifactorial, like Crohn's disease. We make a mistake in medicine when we think it's just one path. We really have to train our doctors to keep a differential, to open the door to different possibilities. We don't do that. We're just thinking, oh, rectal bleed, Crohn's disease, we're done, biologics. I didn't train under that mentality. I trained under, well, rectal bleed could be infectious, could be autoimmune, could be Crohn's disease, could be cancer. You have to keep a differential always in your mind because otherwise you lose the patient. Imagine the patient that has an infectious diarrhea and now you're putting them on biologics the rest of their lives for something that could have been treated as an infection. That's a mistake.
Right.
Especially when I had a kid like that, 4 years old, rectal bleed, diarrhea. The mom didn't feel comfortable starting biologics on the kid, 4 years old. I totally get it. So I actually intercepted this kid. I said, okay, well, let's start this protocol. 3 days later, the rectal bleed is gone. The diarrhea is gone. The kid is back to normal. Imagine if I had started with the biologic because I'm trained to just think of Crohn's disease. This kid, it's great for pharma. They're making $10,000 a month. But for this poor kid, he's a lifetime, not only a lifetime of drugs, but a lifetime of remembering that they're patients. That's my biggest thing in medicine is to forget that we're patients. We're in this planet for such a short time.
Yeah.
You don't want to be reminded every day that you have to take a pill and that you're a patient. What kind of quality of life is that? I'm very big on, I'd prefer to have a quantity of life with quality than a quantity without quality.
Right.
And I think that's what we've missed medicine, and that's what we've done, to the public, is basically pushing these drugs. But then you think about the doctor. The doctor has to follow these guidelines because they're protected. Because the legality, if they don't follow the guideline, is they're sued. So they have to follow these guidelines, and they have to not step out of the boundaries. So what have we done? We've, brainwashed in a way. We've stopped the art of medicine and have started a corporate medicine to avoid the legality.
It's crazy.
So it's not easy, and it's definitely not easy as a doctor. And certainly seeing cases like Dr. Wakefield, you go, I'm not going to talk about that. Trust me. I mean, even me coming on your show, it's, here I am, the girl that brought drugs to market for pharma. What pharmaceutical company is going to hire me now to do clinical trials? But that's something I was ready to do when I stepped into COVID. Because to me, it was, I want to see the truth.
No.
Clearly, I put in 3 protocols through the FDA pipeline, and those 3 protocols should have gone to the next phase. Instead, they were harassed, they were censored, they were blacklisted. We had a huge problem advancing them to the second phase, and they never saw the light.
Which is exactly as you point out with Dr. Andrew Wakefield, scare everyone in science away. We were in the middle of a COVID pandemic that people were dying, 9 out of 10 on ventilators in hospitals were dying.
Yes.
We would be under the assumption that in that situation, they're fast tracking everything. We'll take a look at anything.
Yeah.
When you find there's roadblocks in a moment where they have locked us in our house, something they've never done before.
Yes.
Never done before. I'm locked out of my job. I can't go to work. I can't go to church.
Right.
I can't walk down the street. I got to wear a mask everywhere I go.
Yeah.
I mean, we were at an insane level. And to know that in the middle of that, FDA was putting up more roadblocks than
and
usual.
And it didn't come from FDA, by the way. I have to say, I have to clear that because I lived it. Okay.
Who was blocking it?
Well, let me tell you, the FDA approved my protocol on hydroxychloroquine, Z-Pak, vitamin C, D, and zinc. By the way, hydroxy, Z-Pak, vitamin C, D, and zinc is my patent. Okay. It was my protocol that I came up with when I discovered that hydroxychloroquine and Z-Pak killed the virus. But I also discovered that it also killed the microbiome. So I said, that's not an answer for everyone.
Right.
So I basically never really pushed it, but I really wanted to see what was the big hoopla about it. And is it safe for cardiac patients? Is it safe for patients with comorbidities? Definitely had a role in COVID with the most severe patients that you want to attack the virus quickly before the virus multiplies, right?
Yeah.
So there was a role for that. The fact that I was censored, could not advertise, could not do anything. And here's the thing. My protocol was moved to market from day one, okay? A couple of days later, we get a letter from the FDA. I'm sorry, Dr. Hazan, you have to do a full-on clinical trial. I said, why? They're safe drugs. They should have just gone,
right. They're already proven safe for,
let's treat everybody. You can keep coming with your vaccine, but let's treat as many people as possible with what we have now and learn, right? Let's turn off the fire. So they said, well, you have to restart a new clinical trial. So somebody gave that order. This was not an order of the FDA because I know who was, Stephen Hahn got a lot of slack at the FDA. And I have to defend him because, there's always these pictures that says, oh, he moved on to Moderna. He never moved on to Moderna. He's working for another company. But I have to say, as far as FDA, commissioners, he was legit. He allowed me to do my protocol, to move it to market, and then someone stopped him.
Somewhere else, something else.
So, and here's the thing. A lot of FDA agents are really good and really legit. Somebody at the top is making the order. I've had FDA in my office, numerous times when I do clinical trials for pharma. Never had a 483. A 483 is like a reprimand, okay? Always by the book, clean. I do a clinical trial on ivermectin, doxycycline, zinc, which was second protocol that we wrote that came out in July.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the FDA is in my office. They look at it. They're like, oh, Dr. Hazan, you forgot to submit a form to the IRB, the regulatory board. Mm-hmm. And the form was basically everybody's fine. They're signing the consent. Everybody's, safety. It's basically continuing credits to continue the study, okay? It was August. I was seeing 52 patients a day. I didn't even know we were August. I barely was sleeping. Here I am doing clinical trials with people that are giving them placebo or IP.
Right.
And basically, I don't even know who's IP, who's placebo. People are crashing on me. Their oxygen's dropping. I have to monitor them. There were nights I did not sleep. And so barely had an hour of sleep. So I was like a machine. Plus, I was running these protocols as the hat of a doctor, PI, sponsor, so I was running all of it. I was basically all of it. So to remember that I forgot a form that was was not sent on time.
Form, right? Like you forgot to put
how about the fact that nobody died on my shift doing these placebo-controlled trial? How about that, right?
Right.
So the fact that I got this form that basically said, you forgot to do that. And then the agent was lovely, but she said, I'm sorry, Dr. Hazan, I can't cover my eyes on that. You forgot that. I go, you're absolutely right. And I don't expect you to cover that. I think you should expose it. But I thought to myself, it's no big deal. Corrective actions, correct the mistake you've made. That's what pharma is all about. You make a mistake in paperwork, you do corrective actions and you learn better. Right? This was not like I didn't consent properly or anything like that. It was simply a form was not submitted on time at the IRB. So the patients were all consented. The protocol ran fine. Nobody died. No serious adverse event, nothing. It was a perfect protocol. So I get a 480. So she submitted her report. This is not a big deal. Okay. Everyone I talk to that does clinical trials says to me, you got a 483 for this? For forgetting a form? Are you kidding me? That's 483 is like a reprimand. Like you brought in a patient that doesn't have psoriasis and you gave him a psoriasis drug to enter him in your clinical trial.
Wow. So
That's
a 483 is like some
it's
fraudulent,
a big deal. Yeah.
potentially fraudulent.
Or you completely didn't do consent properly. So I said, okay, well, fine, I'll take the 483. Corrective actions, submitted the corrective actions. They came back to my office and basically found nothing, and we were completely clean. But this 483 out there basically is the ammunition that people are using to retract my papers. So my thing now is, well, if you're going to retract my papers because I'm not a good scientist, then I think we should retract every single drug I help bring to market. Right? It's only fair. Listen, if I'm not a good scientist, why are you keeping Remicade? Maybe I messed up on that too, right? So here's the problem with all this is somebody gave the order to give me that 483. Somebody gave the order to stop.
Basically tattoo it with no matter where it goes.
Yeah, and you heard Zuckerberg say, we were told to censor, and to not advertise. My clinical trials, we could not advertise. So here's the problem. The narrative, they don't like anything that deviates from the narrative. So Dr. Wakefield was a problem because he deviated from the narrative. He was an easy target because he deviated from the narrative. He had an academic position. He had to let go. He was the perfect person to basically do this. I'm not such an easy target because I'm moving all over the place. But here's the thing. My target is basically this healthcare revolution, which is basically waking up the doctors. When a paper that found COVID in the stools gets retracted, doctors that are in academic centers...
Which is what you got that paper published.
Yes, right, they start asking questions. Or a hypothesis is retracted. Doctors start asking questions. Why is a hypothesis retracted? And then that...
Well, I agree. So many of those things during COVID, the doctors that did wake up, I would say probably it felt like about 30% of them, not quite 50.
There's
but
more. There's more coming. There's more.
But one of the things they're like, as soon as I saw the, basically the FDA or CDC, like the public report became, you can't use hydroxychloroquine because it's dangerous.
Right. When you've given it to thousands of patients with
I've
arthritis.
talked to so many doctors, like that was the moment. It was like this light bulb of what the hell are you talking about?
Yes.
You could have said a lot of things that might have got my attention to go, oh, okay, you could say it doesn't work.
Right.
But to say it's dangerous,
Yeah.
they're
No,
like,
well,
that was a lie. Like,
yeah.
I know that's a lie. It's like the safest drug on the planet. We use it for like
When
so many
I-
different things.
When I wrote hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin on my EMR, on my to submit the drugs to the pharmacist, there's a big red warning that says hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin cause QT prolongation. Now, I was doing clinical trials using those drugs.
Causes what?
QT prolongation
What does that
in your EKG.
Okay.
So you have a wave on your EKG, you know, that EKG
Yeah.
you see on TV. So there's a measure of the Q and the T to kind of see, you know, and if it's a little bit larger, it doesn't really mean anything. In fact, Dr. Barodi and I, we kind of joke because we would say, when we heard that, we would say, have you ever heard of anyone dying of QT prolongation? Is that even a thing in cardiology? So, I mean, we do measure because maybe it could cause a rhythm problem, maybe. So we measured that QT prolongation.
Yeah.
But here's the thing I was putting halters on my patients. Every one of my patients, remember, we sponsored it. Me and Dr. Barodi, you know, tried to bring these protocols to market. So we had halters on all these patients. No one. A halter is like, you know, the electrodes, and you put you're monitoring. So we had to hire staff, or I had to go to people's homes and put those halters on them to monitor the full 10 days that they were on the drug. No one had a QT prolongation. That's how I became friends with Peter McCullough, by the way, because, you know, he had a patient and I said, oh, put him on my trial because I want to check the QT prolongation.
Yeah.
And so he was excited that I was doing halters. And so this QT prolongation was measured, you know, somewhere else in the cloud that basically, and this company, Infobiotics, that basically was monitoring all our rhythms. At the end of the study, when we finished the study, they said, by the way, here are your patients that you monitored the EKG, and none of them had prolongation. Now, granted, it was probably about 100 patients, but guess what? It's still 100 that don't. So show me.
So 0 out of 100.
So zero. And by the way, some of these people had, like, one guy had VTAC, which is like a rhythm abnormality, and he still had VTAC before the treatment and after the treatment. In fact, they would call me from the Holter every night to say, hey, your patient's rhythm is still in VTAC. And no kidding, stop calling me. You know, I was looking at other differences. So the fact is, so we published that paper. That paper got retracted because they didn't like the fact that we were contradicting the fact that hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin didn't have a QT prolongation.
Right.
So again, misleading the doctors with this EMR where you're going electronically, writing hydroxy, writing azithromycin, and it gives you this big red sign that says you cannot write these two drugs together. Why? You know, and so that was, you know, remember, I'm the girl that brought drugs to market. I believe in all of clinical trials. I believed in pharma. I believed in the FDA. I believe in the whole institution. I trusted the FDA to do the right. I trust the FDA. I still trust them, honestly. You just have to kind of, you know, deal with them. But you have to say your case, right?
Yeah.
The problem is that this pandemic was like nothing I've ever seen. And I basically if you go back on X, which was Twitter at the time, in 2020, when my protocol was approved on hydroxychloroquine, Z-Pak, vitamin C, D, and zinc, there was a tweet that went off. And it basically said, Dr. Hazan is doing unethical protocol. So remember, my protocol went from move to market to go ahead, do an open label clinical trial. That means we give everybody the same drugs. Let's turn off the fire, right?
Right.
So then on April 20th, 2020, I get this tweet that goes off. Dr. Hazan is doing unethical trials, open label. What is that? What is science? Science has reached a new low. We should be doing placebo-controlled trial. So I saw this tweet. I ignored it. But then the tweet went 70 times retweeted. So I said, wait a minute. There's people behind this making it go viral, right? So I said, you know, I'm going to ignore it. I don't have an ego. I don't care. Talk shit about me. I don't care.
Right.
The next day, I get a letter from the FDA. Dr. Hazan, no, there's a stat news that comes out. There's controversy on Twitter about a protocol that is open label. Should we be really doing open labels or placebo-controlled trials?
During a supposed deadly pandemic? Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
So
the answer is an unequivocal yes.
I was blown away. Okay. So at this point, I've taken my time. I'm fighting with the FDA to get these protocols. I'm fighting to get the drugs and the combination. I'm trying to find funds. Good luck finding any funds on these studies. I'm recruiting, so I'm juggling, right? So I get this stat news, and right away, my protocol is on hold by the FDA. I get a letter, you're on hold. I'm on hold.
When is a journalist holding up a scientific study? Like talk about the tail wagging the dog.
Yeah, so I basically said, you want me to do a placebo-controlled trial in the middle of a pandemic where people are dying? That is so unethical.
Right.
But I said, okay, well, guess what? The placebo is going to be so I went back to the agent that was at the FDA. I was screaming. I mean, like, if you've never heard me scream, I was livid. I said, people are dying. Your people are dying. Your family members are dying. You're making me do a placebo-controlled trial. We should be turning off the fire.
On a totally safe drug. Right.
I'm like, we should be turning off the fire and trying everything and then going back and seeing what the hell happened, right? It's like using a bunch of hoses and buckets to turn off the fire and then seeing which hose was better, right?
By the way, there's plenty of people dying every day that are sent to the placebo group that are there.
Yeah.
Let me take one group of people and see if they do better. Can we just be...
I'm like, the whole world is affected here.
Right.
This is a pandemic, and you want me to do a placebo-controlled trial. Like, we're still practicing medicine, to bring a product? This is not, let's just turn off the fire. So I basically said to the agent on Wednesday, I said, look, either you, so the placebo is going to be vitamin C, D, and zinc. And then I'm not giving placebo, sugar pill. I'm going to give vitamin C, D, and zinc.
To make you happy.
And I'm going to give hydroxychloroquine, Z-Pak, vitamin C, D, and zinc real, but then just vitamin C, D, and zinc, with the sugar pill of hydroxy and Z-Pak.
Right.
So, and I went off and I said, and if you're not letting me do that, I am going to make it my mission to go to every newspaper and blast this out of the wall. Okay. So she goes, so within 24 hours, I get fine. You could use vitamin C, D, and zinc as a placebo. Of course, now the team that's team hydroxychloroquine calls me and emails me, starts criticizing my protocol.
You're
placebo's
making them healthier.
No. They're like, your placebo's not really placebo. Because the academicians, right? I remember Harvey, he called me and he said, you need to have I'm like, Harvey, it's my protocol. I'm not having people die on me, okay?
But they had to be worried that your, vitamin C, D, and zinc
is going to
improve. So you're not letting someone that would normally die because they're not getting anything. So you're making it harder.
Correct.
To prove that. But you believed you had a sense hydroxychloroquine would be successful enough to overcome that?
Honestly, I felt that vitamin C, D, and zinc was great. But I felt that maybe in certain population. But here's the reason I did these trials. To see the truth myself.
Right.
I wanted to see, and I didn't want
I suppose if hydroxychloroquine can't beat C, D, and zinc, let's stick with C, D.
Well, this is what I basically wanted to see. I wanted to be allowed
but for the
treat.
people that like Harvey that wanted to see hydroxychloroquine succeed,
and
they wanted a true placebo, which I understand that.
I get it, but we were not in a level, we were not at a level of academia. We were in a fire.
Yeah.
It's like Malibu, the fires. The fire is burning those houses. You're going to just stare at them, and let them burn, which, I'm not going to go there. But bottom line is, this is what we were. We were in the crisis. People were dying. My job was to be on the front line. And I ran these protocols to allow myself to treat patients because what I wanted was the ability, because then you saw how they attacked all these doctors for treating.
Those doctors appeared on my show, The High Wire, and I watched they would come on with their license, and then the next time I'm interviewing, their license is under review, and by the third time, many of them had lost their license for
board
treating.
or job or anything. So I didn't want to put myself, I literally wrote 3 protocols.
So
which,
you
were
doing trials to protect the fact that you allow you to treat.
License, yes, and to allow me to treat.
Right.
And so to me, if I had a
Say,
protocol
hey,
with
you
the FDA,
can't be upset with
you
me.
can't.
I'm in a trial over here.
And by the way,
right? I'm trying to see if it actually
the
works.
Department of Health came to my office and was like checking on me for 3 years. And I said, why are you here? It's jurisdiction FDA. They've already checked me. They've already seen my protocols. They've already seen my charts. You want me to start interviewing patients? Let's do it. Let's do a documentary on the people I saved, So my thing was allowing me to treat because I wanted to see the truth. What I saw during the pandemic is there was, just like Crohn's, there was a population that could benefit from hydroxychloroquine and Z-Pak because it killed the virus quickly. There was a population that benefited from ivermectin, doxycycline, zinc because it didn't kill the microbiome as much. And then there was a population that vitamins did great. But at the end of the day, guess what? I lost no one during the pandemic. So somehow, to me, that was the power of God. I mean, it's not even me. I was just a messenger and he, guided me. I honestly did not know what I was stepping into. I didn't, but it was a huge awakening.
What do you think you stepped into?
Shit. I mean, that's, at all levels. I mean, I stepped into the microbiome. I got to see the microbiome. I got to see COVID. I got to see, the political agenda. I got to see the corruption. I got to see the narrative changing. And here's the thing, right? The whole time I was saying, here I have worked with Pfizer. I've done clinical trials for Pfizer on cholesterol medication. In fact, right before, probably 5 years before, I had a clinical trial on hypertriglyceridemia with Pfizer. And we would work together and I basically would say, okay, this product, this needs to be done, and they would listen, right? All of a sudden, I'm wearing the hat of a clinical trial doctor treating with early treatment, and I'm seeing the microbiome with post-vaccination. I call Pfizer. Nobody's returning my calls. Nobody's talking to me. Remember, I did clinical trials for Pfizer.
Yeah.
Why all of a sudden you don't want to have a discussion? Why is it just one narrative, one way to go? Why do we have to suppress treatment? But here's the thing. What we all found out is, if you suppress treatment, the vaccine would have never come out because it was under EUA.
I was going to ask you, the fact that the emergency use authorization, that the rule around rush, basically pulling a product mid-safety trial out,
right,
required that there was no other treatment available. You have to prove you're basically in a crisis.
Correct.
We don't have any option here. This thing in trial is the only option we have. Do you believe that explains the hydroxychloroquine, like shutting it down then that way? Is that enough to explain it?
I think if it showed that it worked, or even if vitamins showed that they worked, or even if ivermectin showed that it worked, they would have probably not gone the vaccine route. And I'll tell you, it's interesting because April 13th, and I've said that on Broken Truth, I don't know if you follow the video, he did a documentary. And he actually went back and looked at, the Bill Gates Foundation and everything. So remember, April 1st, my protocol was approved. April 2nd, we got told to start a clinical trial. April 3rd, April 20th, April 13th, I got a letter from the Gates Foundation. Where are you in your clinical trials? We're investigating all the people that are doing clinical trials on hydroxychloroquine. I found it interesting because when I got that letter, I was naive. I thought, oh, Gates Foundation wants to invest in my clinical trial. Great. So I sent them a nice reply. Great. We're moving along really fast. But really, they were trying to get information on where I was in my clinical trial, right?
Right.
And so by the 20th that it was approved by the IRB, then that whole, Twitter went off.
Wow.
Then the FDA shut me down. Then the FDA restarted me on Wednesday when they approved the placebo control trial. So we're already like April 20th. We're not moving.
Right.
Okay, so we're delayed.
Delayed you by 3 weeks.
Oh,
right?
at least.
Yeah.
And then we couldn't. And then guess what? What happened? Once we got approved, the 22nd, the FDA said, okay, Dr. Hazan, you can do placebo control trial. So the FDA was not a bad, governing agency for me as I saw it. They were trying to do the right thing, but at the same time, they had external pressures from people that sent them the Stat News article. Remember that Stat News article went to every IRB around the country? that's owned by a venture capitalist and went to every FDA agent, but it never made the media. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So because they can't afford to put that on stage, right? Because what the public would go crazy. Why are you doing a placebo? Why are you stopping? Why are you questioning this science, this scientist, etc.? So on the Friday, so Wednesday, we're about to restart. I call my IRB and I say, okay, we're ready. FDA has given us the green light. They wait 2 weeks and then tell me, sorry, Dr. Hazan, we can't take your study. Meanwhile, they embarked on the clinical trial for the vaccine, that IRB that I picked, because I picked the hardest IRB to submit for this. So now I'm at the end of April, beginning of May. I have to find another IRB that's willing.
What is an IRB? Just for people.
It's a regulatory board.
Okay.
So you have.
So that regulatory board is, we're not going to take it. We're focusing now on the vaccine.
So anytime you do, my regulatory that I picked and paid them, they said, sorry, we can't take your study. We're going to focus. We got the vaccine study. So they ignored me and basically got the vaccine study. Now I have to pick another IRB. Okay. And it took us a month. So we didn't get started on treating. I was treating them as a doctor with, clinician. But we didn't get started till basically May, end of May. So we lost 2 months and then as this was happening, I started writing the ivermectin, doxycycline, zinc. And that protocol, because Dr. Barodi felt that ivermectin was the way. And that protocol didn't start till July, August. So we submitted it and then we finally got approved. It was only 30 patients. So that was an easy study to do and crank up. While people were crashing on the hydroxychloroquine Z-Pak, I didn't realize that they were crashing. I mean, I didn't know whether they took placebo or the real drug. So I would put them on ivermectin. And that's where we had the discovery that ivermectin did something to the oxygen saturation. And then that's how I discovered that ivermectin is essentially the same in the same phylum as microbes as Bifidobacteria, which was the lost microbes of COVID, the bacteria that essentially severe COVID patients were lacking and that babies have a lot of and old people. So
you just said
it was all the
ivermectin's in the phylum of Bifidobacteria being the center really of your research now. What does that mean? I think of ivermectin as a drug. What do you mean it's in the phylum of
every drug
bacteria?
has so if you look at what are antibiotics, right? Antibiotics are just microbes, right? I mean, if you think of, you go back to the discovery, and I talk about it in my book, Let's Talk sh.t, I show the history of how antibiotics were created. So it was a doctor who basically had a petri dish on his counter, and he had a bacilli on there. And then he eats an apple, and he leaves the apple next to the petri dish, and then the apple mildews, right, has mold on it. And then the mold touches the petri dish and the bacilli disappeared. That was the discovery of penicillin.
Really?
Yeah, so it was essentially the mold of an apple, the mildew of an apple that basically killed off the bacilli. Now they couldn't make enough penicillin with like rotten apples. So a woman came up with mildewed watermelon and said, here's penicillin. And so that's how penicillin was created. So essentially, what antibiotics are is they are other microbes. They're, in a war with, when you start thinking of vaccines, it's just microbes, pieces of microbes. Now, they're either pieces of microbes that are dead to give you that signature, or they're alive like the MMR. So when you think of antibiotics, it's other microbes fighting. So, in a world of microbes, it's microbes fighting microbes. And what we learned from C. diff is in order to suppress C. diff, you need microbes, more bacteria to suppress it. So, so when you start understanding what are drugs, how are drugs made, right? So when you start understanding, peptides are getting huge, notoriety right now, and people are going crazy over peptides. But what are peptides, right?
Yeah.
So what is colostrum? Immunoglobulins. What is bovine immunoglobulins? Blood from the cow that's basically spun around, and you just take the immunoglobulins and you give it to patients. So,
Well, get back to what's a peptide. Explain to me peptide.
So it's basically a protein.
It is the
so
hottest
it's a
thing.
protein. So it's an extraction. It's a protein that basically is extracted that essentially people have figured out. Like think about breast milk, right? I can take from the breast milk a compound, a component of the breast milk and enlarge it and discover it and say, okay, this is a compound of a protein. This is a protein from breast milk that I'm going to make into a drug. So when you start looking at how drugs are made, how drugs are manufactured, well, they're made somehow, right? So when you think about, ivermectin, what is ivermectin? It's the fermented product of a bacteria that's in the soil. So that fermentation, that secretion of the bacteria is what ivermectin is. So when you give that secretion, is that secretion feeding bifidobacteria and therefore increasing your bifidobacteria when you need it? Because maybe bifidobacteria is the essence of immunity. Maybe, right? I mean, that's why it's all research. But there's one, when...
Is that what you're... In your mind, as you dream about this journey into bifidobacteria, I mean, and I've watched lots of different scientists. It seems like you guys find something you really get locked on. You know what I mean? Like Judy Mikovits, really big on the mouse. What is it? The virus in mice that somehow gets into the blood supply, and then everything starts becoming an issue. And if we could deal with it, but for you, I guess my question is this: is there the chance that bifidobacteria is the secret to life?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm
Do you ever
willing
wake
to
up though
explore.
thinking, "Oh my God"?
I mean, obviously, the Holy Grail. Everybody's looking for the Holy Grail.
Yeah.
Is bifidobacteria the Holy Grail? I don't know. I think the microbiome holds. I don't think it's the Holy Grail. I'll be honest, because there are some. If you look at the Amazon jungle, they don't have. They live in that diversity, and bifidobacteria is not really prominent there.
Okay.
Different cultures don't have bifidobacteria, so it seems to be more, America, Europe, etc. So, and again, from countries that are using milk products, so maybe milk protein is stimulating that bifidobacteria. I don't think it's the Holy Grail. I think the Holy Grail is really that resilient microbe that you could have a toxic microbe and survive with that toxic microbe, as opposed to someone who gets that microbe and it kills them, right? So I think that's what I'm in search of. Like, what is the resilient microbe, right? How do you survive COVID? And what microbe allowed you to survive COVID when you've killed your bifidobacteria, for example?
How many diseases have you looked at? Like, if you were sort of do a list of, here's a disease that when I see this disease in a prevalent state where it becomes dangerous, I also recognize that the bifidobacteria has disappeared. Like,
so remember, I look mostly at Americans. I've not looked at, the whole world, although that's my dream, is basically to map the microbiome of the world and protect it and preserve it. Because really, I mean, think about the Central Africa. What does the microbiome look like? Somebody needs to map that.
Yeah.
What is Amazon jungle? Somebody needs to map that in case they disappear or in case they need those microbes, right? Yeah, I mean, how many diseases right now in America? Autism, long haulers.
So autism, you see severe autism.
Severe autism, we see in the majority of kids loss of bifidobacteria.
Okay.
And what's amazing is when you recover these kids. So I told this to Scott Jackson at the National Institute of Standard. I said, look, because they're trying to come out with all these stool tests, right? Everybody's doing stool tests, but what does it mean? Nothing. No real validation. In fact, Dr. Jackson did a study where he looked at all the consumer products on the market and found that they had completely different results. Like some of them had 90 species that were found, another 3, I mean, it was completely, a chaos, right? He basically created a consortium of microbes, like a model of poop, and he gave it to all these labs and he said, okay, show me what microbes I gave you, and they all had different results. So, which basically said, and he spoke at the Malibu Microbiome meeting and said, consumer beware, because there's a lot out there and you're misled. I mean, we talked this morning about the probiotics.
Yeah.
But imagine when you're, probiotics, and then on top of that, you add, stool tests that are telling you have this microbe, but you don't. You have H. pylori and you don't have
Now, is
H.
that just
pylori.
because everyone's standards are different, or they don't know how to test, or
Everybody's standards are different, and they don't have clinical data. So I told Dr. Jackson, I said, look, the bottom line with the microbiome is you have to achieve a cure to understand the microbiome. Then you can go back and see. Unfortunately, in order to achieve a cure, you have to practice the art of medicine. And you have to be courageous enough to see. So when I saw my patients that are hypoxic, and then all of a sudden their bifidobacteria goes up after I give them ivermectin, I say, oh, well, maybe that's a mechanism of action by which, so my hypothesis.
So with COVID, you would give ivermectin, bifidobacteria. So COVID, another disease that.
COVID had lots of bifidobacteria. Severe COVID, or people that have recurrent COVID, inevitably it's loss of bifidobacteria.
And you give ivermectin, somehow that feeds the bifidobacteria because it goes up.
Correct.
And you see the oxygen levels.
Yes.
Because the crashing oxygen is a huge part of the danger of COVID.
And so what, in my mind, and how I hypothesized it, was essentially what's happening is, remember, the blood circulates, right? Everything that's in the nose is in the gut, right? Because the nose has viruses in there. They go through the blood and they end up in the gut. So, and that was our study when we found COVID. We saw everybody that we tested by nasal swab ended up having COVID in the gut. So we found it in the stools, okay? So the hypothesis was, if COVID is in the gut and I'm giving ivermectin and I'm increasing the bifidobacteria, maybe the bifidobacteria are taking on the cytokines, flushing them out, and therefore there's room in the colon now to grab the cytokines from
quickly for people watching.
Lungs.
What is a cytokine?
So it's basically a secretion that's basically causes you to, I don't know how to explain it in layman term, but essentially it's what causes the crashing. It's what people have. It's basically a secretion that causes people to have like almost an anaphylactic reaction. Okay, so cytokine storm
are cytokines of a benefit at all? Is it like
no?
An
So you don't.
Always
it's an
negative?
Inflammatory secretion. It's a secretion. It's basically it's like toxic secretions that are basically creating an anaphylactic reaction. So you want cytokines to be down. So when we talk about cytokine flush, it's like an anaphylactic reaction. So my thought.
So you want the cytokines to get out of the body.
So if you've got some cytokines here, you've got some cytokines in the stomach, in the bowels, in the colon. And what happens is you liberate, because you're increasing bifidobacteria, you're liberating the cytokines, they're flushing out. Inevitably, people that on the front line, what I observed is everybody that I was given either high dosages of vitamin C or vitamin D or ivermectin.
And vitamin C also increases bifidobacteria.
They would get diarrhea. And then the diarrhea is essentially you're removing all this virus out of your system. So in my mind, what was happening was maybe the bifidobacteria is grabbing the virus, right? Because bifidobacteria is 20 times bigger than a virus, which is smaller. And maybe it's flushing it out, leaving room for the lungs to now move those cytokines and viruses via circulation to the colon to evacuate. Remember, the colon is there to evacuate all your toxins, right? You eat a hamburger that's got E. coli, you're going to get diarrhea because the body doesn't want that much E. coli. So your microbiome, the purpose of it is to say, hey, intruder alert.
Get this out of here.
Get this out of it. I'm going to give diarrhea to the person. And then you feel better because you've gotten red. Or when you're vomiting, you're drinking something that has a Bacillus cereus and you're vomiting a bacteria. And you're essentially vomiting. So what happens when you're vomiting? You're getting rid of that. The body recognizes this is a foreign bacteria, too much of it, get rid of it. So vomiting diarrhea is essentially a good thing to get rid of, microbes that don't belong there, right? So when you saw with COVID, people were having diarrhea, that was actually a good thing to get rid of the virus. So that was my thought process anyways during the pandemic, was maybe that's how it happens. This was a discovery. This was an observation. It was an observation. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. And, I would talk to my friends and to my colleagues, and they all kind of observed the same kind of thing. So, and here's the interesting thing, because I was on a podcast the other day, and the guy was very negative, like he was criticizing my hypothesis. Well, the data is not accurate. I go, well, the data was accurate when I published it. It was retracted after I published it. So, I had what I had dealt with. But here's the other thing is, it's a hypothesis. I'm allowed to put in there whatever I want to put in there. It's a hypothesis, right?
Right.
So one of the things that, when we were talking, he said to me, he goes, well, even though it was taboo, ivermectin, I still used it. And actually it improved me. So here's a guy that was a total academics trained guy, pro-vaccine, pro-placebo-controlled trials, just follows that box, right? And here he realized ivermectin, which was deemed not good, he took it himself because he wasn't going to die. And he realized that it improved him. So that's the problem. When they censored, when they killed, and then other doctors heard from other doctors. One of my very good friends is a physician at Cedars-Sinai who is an expert in fatty liver and NASH. And he had a family member that was dying of COVID in another country. And he called me and I said, this is what you do. You give him ivermectin, doxy. He's like, are you sure? I go, dude, trust me on this. The family lived. Guess what? He didn't believe the placebo-controlled trial anymore from University of Minnesota on ivermectin because he saw it himself, that his family members lived. So for those doctors, and I'm friends with a lot of doctors. I have 9 doctors in my family. Mm-hmm. So when they experience themselves ivermectin, or they experience having COVID and took whatever drug or vitamins, they got to see for themselves, wait, I'm fine. I'm okay. I mean, like some family members that are doctors, they didn't even care about COVID anymore. After they saw like I was treating all these patients and a COPD, CHF, they didn't even test. They were like, whatever. I don't want to, my husband would say, are we still talking about COVID? COVID's over. I'm like, no, it's still around.
And it's why I actually sit here thinking, am I talking about COVID again? And I don't, you want to keep a podcast interesting, but
to learn.
It is, there's so much corruption around what happened. There's something so wrong took place in science that is so far outside of the reason and the protocols and the standards that have been developed for a century, when it's suddenly everything just said, no, we're not sticking to any of the rules that got us here today. You got to go, why?
Well, and here's the problem. The problem is scientists have an ego that basically says, this is my science, and they're going to push. It's like me. I could be saying, this is my way. It's bifidobacteria, no way. Right. I'm not saying that. I'm like, prove me wrong. I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing. I'll be the first one to tell you, I don't know sh.t. I don't. Yeah. There's trillions of microbes out there. There's the fact that I could possibly even know is impossible. I know some things. I would love to publish. I would love to publish those things so that the next guy comes along with an innovation and says, hey, by the way, Sabine, I saw you're right on this, but I think you're wrong on this. Listen, I love it when people prove me wrong because that's when I'm learning, right? So
I'm the same way, by the way. It's why I've been in debating people. I don't debate to prove I'm right. I'm debating to say, let me push this. Usually I always say,
push it.
It goes back and forth. If you've thought this further down the road than I have, then I'm all ears. And that's how I get, better, smarter, really, is, wow, I hadn't even thought of that. I mean, when someone tells me something in a subject I thought I knew something about, and they bring up something I hadn't even thought of, I'm like, oh my God. One of my best friends years ago, was, I've always been argumentative. He's like, oh, you always have to be right. I said, no, I just tend to be right.
No, well.
But it's only because if I'm in an argument, I'm the type of person that, like, I don't get into an argument that I haven't thought about. I'm not going to argue something I don't understand. But if you're even politics, whatever it is, I'm pretty confident I've thought this down. So let's have this out. And it's not like I'm fascinated. Can you prove me wrong?
And here's the problem with me is if you suffocate me and you censor me,
Right.
I'm going to become this lioness and I'm going to say, no, let's talk about it. Let's keep analyzing, because you're not going to tell me today, with everything I've lived through COVID, that treatment didn't work. Right. You're not. No one died. I'm still standing, okay? Right. No one died. So you're not going to prove me wrong, okay? Right. And here's the thing. At the end of the day, everyone becomes a patient, you know? The pharma lobbyist becomes a patient. Do you know how many venture capitalists I've treated this pandemic with a vaccine injury? And they all invested in Moderna and Pfizer. And in a way, I go, but I go, wow.
That's a bad investment.
I go, wow, now they want microbiome alteration. I'm like, we're not there yet. I'm sorry. We should have invested properly, like choose wisely.
Right. I could use a couple of the hundreds of billions of dollars poured into mRNA, which is exactly what happened, by the way.
Of course.
I think
it was
what
happened, money.
Wanted, mRNA had been there forever. It wasn't going anywhere. They couldn't really get it to work. But boy, they had this wet dream, if you will, a vaccine that can be made overnight for anything that we can imagine. We don't have to grow it in egg cells anymore. We don't have to guess anymore. This is it. We're going to beat nature. So let's just make this is the moment the whole world pours every billions and billions and billions of dollars
in the middle of a pandemic
to make this product finally work. And oh my God, we can't even get it. We can't get it out fast enough to test it if these other products work. So get rid of them. It's like literally like a guy in Israel that I met that's a professor of crime. He calls it a crime cyclone, where it starts with, you got caught in a lie. You try to block the person in the light. You hit them. You actually kill them. Someone saw you kill them, and now you got to kill that person. And it never finishes until you are like on a killing spree.
Until you're on your deathbed and you're like, I need a new microbiome. Wait. I'm not feeling so well. What happened? No, I mean, you've got to stop. You've got to acknowledge you made a mistake. You were on the wrong path. Listen, messenger RNA technology probably could be amazing. But right now, it was released too early. We should have never released it on a virus that's mutating. Right. And we should have never released something to the whole entire world.
Exactly.
I have no problem. And mandate it. That was the other thing.
Insanity.
Why are you mandating it in the children that are surviving when, you want to worry about the old people, the comorbidities? Go for it. Worry about that.
Right.
But why are you giving it with a death rate that is so low in the children? Why are you mandating it in the children? That was my problem. Yeah. Here's the other problem from the beginning. And I knew I was right, like you, on this. My question was, when we found COVID in the stools, we saw different mutations at the spike level. And the question that I had was, how can you vaccinate something that has a different mutation at the spike level? So that means I'm giving ABC, but now the virus is FGH. For a vaccine to work, you have to have ABC matching ABC.
Right.
Now the next guy next door has FGH. Well, I mean, the vaccine's not going to work for him, right? Now, on top of that, what we showed, which is basically the vaccine kills the Bifidobacteria. Now you're taking this vaccine for ABC. You killed your BIF. The virus comes in, FGH, down the road, 3 months, 6 months, or a month down the road, and you get COVID again. And then you get vaccinated again, and you get COVID again. I mean, when do you stop and say, that doesn't work?
Right.
Let's forget about this idea.
Right.
It's not working. I mean, that was at the beginning.
Somewhere between 5 and number 9 boosters.
I mean,
somewhere in here, someone should have said, maybe it's time to go back to the drawing board.
But here's the thing. For me, anyways, when I saw, okay, it's killing the Bifidobacteria, not a good idea for me.
Right.
It's the virus is mutating, treatment's working, vitamins are working. Maybe I'll just keep doing that. And then what happened was I said, well, what's the logic here? Are we supposed to do a vaccine every 3 months? And then, okay, now I'm killing my Bifidobacteria. If you believe the Bifidobacteria mentality, but I believe it, right?
Right.
Now I'm predisposed to other viruses, right? Because now I've killed my defense mechanism, my good microbe that helps me break down sugar. And now I'm getting another virus, not COVID. Another virus, okay, that was manipulated. Like we're going to take tuberculosis, we're going to take tuberculosis, mycoplasma, and COVID, and we're going to put them together because that's the world we're living in right now. People have no idea. We are in the designer bugs. The same way that you can take a tree and a branch.
We're talking about a measles, COVID vaccine. I mean, like mixing all this stuff
the problem is if you mix microbes, you can CRISPR one piece of the microbe and put it with another and another, and eventually you have a new novel drug, a new novel bacteria that you can patent, and then you can have a treatment for that patented bacteria.
And boy, it'd be really convenient if that little Franken virus gets loose, and then you're the only one with a product that stops it.
So you're killing the immunity.
I don't want to wax.
Yeah, so you're killing the immunity. Now another virus comes along, you need another vaccine. So now you have COVID, you have another virus. So we're going to start doing that for every single virus out there. There's a trillion.
Yes, we are.
So are we supposed to take a trillion vaccines every 3 months?
This is what I've been warning the public of for like the last 6, 7 years.
So here's my question.
They want to vaccinate for every bacteria and every virus on the planet because they don't actually care about you. But boy, if they can make $100 billion on one COVID vaccine, how about all the millions and billions we just keep and mRNAs overnight?
Yeah.
And we can get idiots like President Biden to just force you to take it.
So here's the problem. You're now susceptible to viruses in tomatoes. You're susceptible to viruses and peppers because you're immunosuppressed up to a certain point, right? What's the next thing? Are we going to wear helmets like the Jetsons? Are we going to live in a bubble? So
they had those advertised in the airport.
But listen,
I was like starting to joke.
That's
like the
future they want us to head into.
I know.
And then they're going to mess up this planet so much that, of course, we're going to go to Mars, which is, by the way, they've put poop in Mars. So that microbiome is populating the planet. So there
Wait. They put
there
poop
is
in
a
Mars?
scientist. I don't know how much
Hold on.
that's real enough.
But burying the lead here, Sabine.
So I heard from a scientist. I don't know if it's real. I don't want to say it. But basically, they are working on, putting microbes in the planet. Yeah. Yes. Wow. So you mess up this planet enough, you have to have the vision. Fast forward 100 years, what are you going to do, right? So that's where I'm at. I'm at 100 years from now. When I stepped into autism and I saw the rate of autism, 1 in 33 in New Jersey, I said, what do we do? And the microbiome diluting little by little. Let me just tell you, in the last 6 months, and this is not a joke, this is not a drill, this is what wakes me up at night. In the last 6 months, less than 5% of stool samples we've analyzed, over 1,000 stool samples we've analyzed at Progenobiome, less than 5% have Bifidobacteria.
No way.
And 1 had lactobacillus. 1 patient out of 1,000. So now let me ask you, what happens when you lose Bifidobacteria and lactobacillus and you can't absorb sugar and you can't absorb calcium? What happens?
That's what those do. So
what happens? Your mitochondria are messed up. Your Krebs cycle is messed up. Your energy is messed up. You're tired. Humanity is going extinct. Okay, that's a reality. And so, yes, of course, there's robots are coming just in time for humanity to go extinct. So if you want to see the vision of what the future is, this is what's happening. So if we don't stop right now, I have no problem with the robots. I'm all for robots. Bring them on. They can watch the elderly folks and much easier for everybody.
Right.
And they can mow the lawn. They could do whatever they want to do, okay? Because frankly, there's a lot of jobs that humans don't want to do anymore because we're all consumed with these social media and cell phones, right?
But how are they going to be able to afford the cell phone to watch the social media? But that's a whole other story.
But the fact is, I have no problem with evolution. I have no problem in moving forward. I have no problem with putting microbes in Mars. I have no problem with continuing to advance. What I have a problem with is stopping humanity, stopping the human contact, stopping the innovations, stopping the questioning. I have a problem with that because it's all great and you're making a ton of money, but here's the problem. What happens when you're a patient? Who are you going to go to?
Right.
Who's going to innovate your treatment
do you do
in a world of robots?
This is my thing with the vaccine and anything.
Right.
any pharmaceutical product, almost anything, to give it to have the goal of giving a brand new product to everyone on the planet, one that has some outside potential to maybe insert itself into your genome.
Right.
And clearly they knew that was an issue because they're looking at, they don't want you getting pregnant. They don't want anyone having sex in the trial.
Right.
They were worried about something. It is clear they were worried about something you're not usually worried about in a trial, right?
Right.
So, you know, whatever germline transfer, whatever they were looking for. So then your goal is to give it to everyone on the planet. If you mess that up, if there's something you got wrong, if this is a thalidomide moment, then our whole species is bye-bye. And by the way, nature has never figured out. Nature has never been able to convince every president in every country to get this virus inside of you immediately.
Exactly.
It can't do it.
Right.
It's never been able to. But boy, we can efficiently do it as human beings. And if we're going to keep what I've said before, maybe COVID isn't that dangerous. Maybe it's fine that we got away with it. But if we keep allowing the pharmaceutical industry to skip out of a safety trial, get every leader around the world to force the next pharmaceutical product onto you with no safety trial that's messing with your genetics, that is, you know, dealing with spike proteins and could insert itself in your genome, if we keep dealing with science that way, we are not long for this planet.
Correct.
Because there are plenty of drugs and vaccines that have failed. Right. And we are not giving this a time to be tested. And then you gave it to everybody. They should celebrate. I've always said this. They should celebrate the anti-vaxxers. They should always celebrate those group of people, as crazy as they may be, for just keeping a pure bloodline in case we F this up.
But
if we accidentally injected everyone with something that's killing all of us, we're going to need that little control group
But if you say pure bloodline, they're already going to talk to you and say you're anti-Semite, so you got to be careful.
Watch the language.
You got to be careful, you know? I mean, I made a mistake on Instagram one time. I said, you know, pure blood, pure shit, right? And I was talking about no hepatitis C, no HIV, like testing, right? Oh my God, I got attacked as anti-Semite. And I said, what is that? Where's that from, right? And so it is crazy how they're dividing us.
Yeah.
It is crazy how they are creating conflict for the price of a stock. And ultimately, again, at the end of your life, even if you're that billionaire, you're going to want to stay alive a little bit longer, and nobody's going to innovate on how to keep you living longer. And believe me, Bifidobacteria is not the answer. So, you know, we've got to keep it, we've got to be, you know, ethical, righteous, and be honest with ourselves to say, we don't know it all. Listen, if we knew it, we would have reproduced blood by now. The fact that we need another human being to give us a blood transfusion is ridiculous. Why haven't we, with all this technology that we can manipulate microbes, why can't we make blood? Why can't we make synthetic blood? We can't. You need to go to the blood bank to donate your blood to give it to another human being. So what happens when you mess up the blood? What happens when you mess up the microbiome of humanity? How do you go back? And like you, that was my first thought. A new technology on a virus that's mutating. What happens if we're wrong?
Yeah.
What happens if we're wrong? You know?
And censoring anybody asking that question.
And of course you should be. Of course, I'm always on the opposite. If somebody's telling me to go right, I'm going to go left. I mean, if you want to get to the top of the mountain, you don't follow the cars that are like just stuck in traffic. You find a different way with a different route and you get to the top of the mountain, right? So to me, that was just, you know?
So just to get back into your wheelhouse space, which I think is I would say it's the fastest growing, most accelerating perspective we have in this world, is that your gut health.
Yes.
May be affecting things you never imagined. Yes. And to Andy Wakefield's, to bring this full circle, and what he said to me, he said, you know, Del, when we were doing these studies where they were just studying the intestinal systems of these 12 children who, and just very quickly for people that don't know, he's looking at their intestinal system. He's got 12 gastroenterologists and pediatric gastroenterologists all lined up. What is this very strange thing happening in the stomachs of these children? They happen to be autistic. The only thing that the vaccine had to do with was in the clinical investigation, like interviewing the parents, what's happened with this kid. Tell us everything you know about this kid, which is part of doing a study like that. A case study is just everyone that knows this kid, tell me what you knew. Pediatricians, every doctor that's touched
being a detective.
Be a detective. It just happened, like I think 11 of the 12 parents said, my child's autism, which is part of this thing, started right after they had the MMR vaccine. Study wasn't about it, but they had to write it into just the case study. This is what all the parents said. And then this gut disease seemed to appear right about the same time. But to get back to the point of it, Andy said when we cleared the gut, when we would do a cleansing so that we could do a colonoscopy the next day, he said in most of these kids, the mannerisms disappeared that day. That the repetitive disorders and the motion disorders and things, that they suddenly were acting, much more like a child that didn't have autism just the day where they cleared their gut out, which blew my mind. And
so you wonder whether it cleared whatever was in the gut microbiome.
Right.
I'll tell you that you notice that also with vancomycin. When you give kids vancomycin that are autistic, they do improve.
So recently I had a family member close to me that went in the hospital for a perforation or something in the colon. And they're getting older, so they've had a car accident, they hit their head, but there's been some decline in, I don't know if it's Alzheimer's or not, or something like that, but, there's some loss of memory, especially their spouse recognizes it. And I called just to see how they were doing, and the husband said to me, like he was in tears, he said, I don't know what it is in this surgery, but they just, they had to clear her bowels out so they could do the surgery, and now that she's come out of the surgery, she's remembering things she hasn't remembered in the last couple of years, and she's speaking very clearly, and she's coherent, and and is remembering everything throughout the day. And like tears, I could hear it. Like, she's back. My wife is back.
So they probably removed bacteria that was secreting.
And toxins. It reminded me, 8 years ago when Andy said when they cleared the bowels, and so that's where I think what you're doing is so fascinating, right? Is that and I've said it, when I see these headlines that as it turns out, your gut health is if depression. Now we're looking at.
Well, we published on anxiety and the microbiome.
Yeah.
And we presenting tomorrow actually on bipolar disorder in the microbiome.
What are you publishing? What are we?
There's a signature microbiome. So there's a loss of bifidobacteria, for one.
Okay.
But there's also loss of other microbes in bipolar disorder. So, which makes you think, is the person that's bipolar, you know how you have people that are attracted to, they always say, I keep going out with the same boyfriend all the time, and that person's bipolar. You wonder if they're attracted, if that bipolar person is attracted to someone that has the microbes
that they need.
So that's going to be the future. I mean, in the future, we're going to start understanding that we're animals, right? I mean, if you think of the animal kingdom, they smell each other to know that their lions belong with lions, right? With the lioness, animals belong together. Humans were a little bit more specific, and how you get attracted to someone, right? Are you attracted because you have different microbes that they are lacking and that you have, right?
You can benefit each other. And evolutions make you build a stronger being.
Yeah, and then when you join together, it's interesting because when you look at couples and husband and wife, you start noticing the same microbes. They're kind of like they're one with the other, and that's why when one spouse leaves another, there's something being missed, right? You lost your connection, your umbilical cord almost, because you're connected that way. So you've shared microbes through years of marriage. You start you start resembling each other in your thought process. You even exchange your personality. So, in the future, I think we're going to start looking at, people that are compatible, maybe the new matching system.
That blew my mind, because now I'm thinking, I've always wondered, those people that get like the vicious and ugly divorce, and you know them, and you're like, I remember when you two loved each other, and now you cannot remember ever having thought like that. Like, you two see each other as like the worst humans on the planet. Is it possible that one of them had their gut biome just
Yeah, probably
crashed and
messed up.
trashed and
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
thrown
The
out, so
virus
they
could
just
have
lost
gotten in, and yeah,
all their connection with each other?
yeah. So yeah, I think the whole microbiome is going to get us to a different level of looking at life, looking at relationships, looking at death. So I think we need to step into it. That's it. That's why I stepped into it. Listen, I was in Africa, and most people take pictures of the animals. I was collecting the stools, and I was fascinated. I mean, I was literally fascinated to see why is a lion a carnivore? Why is an elephant an herbivore? Right? Think about the elephant. He's eating everything. He's like this big animal. The lion eats once a week, right? And he's a carnivore. What is it in their microbiome? And what was fascinating is when you look at their microbiome, completely different microbiome. That's why the lion cannot be with an elephant. Completely different microbes, right? So it's fascinating, the whole microbiome. And same thing with the cows, same thing with the animals. Think about people that live with their cats, right? Are you having an animal as a comfort because you have mental illness and therefore that animal gives you microbes by holding that animal, right? So he's essentially a reservoir of microbes that's coming to you in times of need, right?
Yeah.
So that's why there's people that are clinging on to animals, and they need animals for their own survival. So yeah, the whole thing of the microbiome is fascinating. I looked at the microbiome of a woman with colon cancer, and her cat had colon cancer. And it was fascinating to see some of the similarities between the woman and her cat.
You looked
And
at both of them.
I looked at both of them. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, that's what I do, right? I mean, everybody that knows me, if they have an interesting story, I'll always say, "Can I have your stools?"
It makes for an interesting dinner party. We're
all
going
the
to
time.
Sabine's again. Get ready.
No, but actually, I don't even talk poop anymore. I don't even talk. People come to me and ask me all these questions. So
but it's all set up in the bathroom. You just go in the bathroom and leave me a stool sample.
No,
the only thing. Don't bring me any gifts. Don't bring me flowers. I don't need a bottle of wine. Just come
exactly.
full.
No, I was on this safari, and the guide knew I was collecting stools because he was stopping at every animal. He's like, "This is an antelope poop. This is," and he was allowing me to collect all these stool samples. And then he says to me, he stops. We're about to have lunch. He prepares the whole lunch beautifully, and then he takes a big dong of an elephant, and he opens it, and he goes, "Look, see what's in the dong of the elephant? There's herbs, he's showing me this is a big dong of an elephant, right?" And come flying ticks. So the first thing is, of course, I collected a stool sample, right, to see the dong of the elephant. So then he puts it back in the ground. Then he gives me my food without cleaning his hands. I'm like, great, I'm getting, refloralization.
You mean like
there
ticks?
were ticks in the dong of the elephant because the elephant eats everything on the ground, and there's ticks everywhere. I mean, we're in Africa, right?
Yeah.
So I go, by the way, is Lyme disease a big problem here in Africa? He goes, "No, we don't have a problem with Lyme disease in Africa." So I go, "Can I get a stool sample? I want to see your stools." And sure enough, what I discovered, without saying it because I have to publish it, was just amazing, because that was the reason, he's surviving, because he's got something in his gut that basically survives touching the dung of the elephant. So everything from analyzing the dirt in Africa to analyzing the dirt in the Sahara Desert to analyzing the microbiome of Bedouins in Morocco to Africa. It's fascinating to see the differences and the beauty of the diversity of the microbiome.
It seems to me, I had an interesting interview I did years ago with a woman she was doing tuberculosis injections, like BCG vaccine to cure type 1 diabetes.
Right.
And she would give 2 shots of this, and then I think her name was Diane something. It's too bad, but she's in Boston. You can find it, and she's done lots of studies. But she would give 2 shots of BCG vaccine in a month, and 3 years later, type 1 diabetes disappears. Something that seemed impossible years ago, and she's having like insane, success with this. And I asked her to come on the show, which was weird because it was a vaccine that she was using, and I don't think she looked me up. And I titled the show, "Did Del find a vaccine that he likes?"
Well, that would have been a good
But
vaccine.
she came on, and I was getting tons of hate. Half my audience had dropped out of the buff before I could get to the end of the interview. But I was leading to one point with her, and which was by the time she talked about how these trials worked, and by the way, similar trials in France with BCG vaccine and multiple sclerosis, and same thing. 3 years later, it disappears in a lot of patients.
Wow.
So super fascinating. And I said, okay, then does this mean that it's possible that tuberculosis has a benefit to the body? Because you're essentially, it's a very raw vaccine. You're introducing tuberculosis to the body. So is there, and she said, oh, that's exactly what this means. So tuberculosis is the most prolific, bacteria on the planet. It was in everything. It was in our water. It was like everywhere we went. But then we killed it. We used Clorox. We got chlorine in our water. We got rid of it everywhere.
Yes.
And we're seeing autoimmune disease because she's like, I think this is a priming element in the body, and now reintroducing it in some form. And so I just think, in America, we are now so antiseptic, right? Everything's just clean.
Kill the bug.
You see your kid like on the ground. Oh my God. Like we're, and more, COVID made it even worse. Like OCD is just going crazy. And yet, I guess what I want to understand is when you're doing these studies, if I have, like we talk about Giardia in a river in South America, or even in Colorado, if we're not drinking out of that river anymore. We used to. You used to be as a pioneer. Giardia was there. You used to just drink. That was great water.
Yeah, because you had it in your gut.
Now we can't drink it. So that's my point.
Yes.
It has to already be in your gut. Your body has to develop a balance with it.
Yes. So let me explain. Immunity is in your gut. Immunity is basically having a microbe. The concept of vaccine. And remember, vaccines are a brand. It's a way to say, we're going to prophylax against a bug. Okay. So they came up with, the whole vaccine branding was essentially, it's a way to say, how do we prevent tuberculosis? We're going to give it a vaccine to prevent. Okay. But what are we giving exactly? We're giving a little piece of a bug for your body to recognize, right? When you go to the allergist immunologist, right? What are you doing when you're having a peanut allergy? He's giving you a tiny piece of that peanut, and then he's increasing it slowly, so that you no longer have a peanut allergy.
To introduce it into the body.
So the same thing with microbes, right?
Well, hold on just very quickly, because I think this vaccine thing's interesting. So essentially, and I've said this, the pharmaceutical industry tried to just make money off of something that was happening naturally. When you caught measles, you were introducing measles into the body, and now you're immune for life. You can't get it every time you come into it. You could come into an even more deadly strain, and you're protected. But pharma said, hey, we could do that, and we'll just say we have and maybe they do. What their argument was, we have a safer way to introduce measles to the body, or a safer way to introduce...
So you're thinking of the population that's super healthy.
Yeah.
And remember, back in the days, there was a lot of diversity of microbes probably, right? The population right now is not as healthy. Remember, I just told you, 1,000 people.
All these reasons.
So 1,000 people, 5% have BIF, 1 has lactobacillus. So unfortunately, these people are susceptible.
Yeah.
So the idea of vaccinating is really to say, okay, well, here's a controlled method to vaccinate so that we can protect the immunosuppressed, the people that don't have the good microbiome.
And that group is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, the immunosuppressed.
And that's the problem, is we're getting a bigger and bigger, sicker and sicker. So the small population, that's the resilient, right? You, for example, you're like, I'm okay. I'm like me. I faced COVID and I was like, I'm fine.
Right.
I'm going to be fine.
Yeah.
I'm not going to worry about COVID. I lived in Morocco, for God's sakes. There's worse microbes in Morocco, right? In the deserts of Morocco.
Yeah.
So toxic E. coli for one of them. So when you are resilient, when you know your body, you've survived viruses, it doesn't affect you, you know what to do. You're the population that's basically, your microbes are needed for the population that's immunosuppressed in essence, okay? The problem is science and medicine does not look at people like us that are resilient. They're looking at the rest of the majority of the population, which is immunosuppressed, which is eating 5,000, which is eating like 5,000 calories, crap food, 300 pounds overweight, so that population, or sensitive, they need a pill for depression, they need a pill for waking up, they need a pill to go to sleep. We've become a society that's victimized, okay? And unfortunately, if you look at what the government is doing, it's allowing all these people to stay victimized and continuing. And pharma
and by
feeds
the way, though,
on that.
This is you're pointing to one of the things that I learned working with Bobby. One of the first things I did with Bobby, I've talked about it a lot. Donald Trump in his first term asked Bobby to go meet with the NIH, saying, I want you to bring all your questions and problems to the NIH. We'll send all the best vaccinators and scientists around that, and you bring the conversation. And it came down to, we had two major questions, really. We can't find a double-blind placebo trial of any of the vaccines that we're giving our children. Are you not doing them? Essentially, they admitted, no, we don't do them for vaccines. We're literally skipping the gold standard on safety for vaccines, which is crazy. And then why don't you do a study? Because they said it would be unethical. It's unethical to have a placebo group that's not getting the product. So then we said, well, why don't you do a, retrospective study of your database and look at, a comparative study of the 10 million people you have in this database. And they said, we can't figure out how to do that study. And it haunted me. I mean, and in there, I was like, and I sat there thinking, they can't figure out how to compare vaccinated to unvaccinated individuals. I mean, they do comparative studies. That's how science works. It's all a comparative study. And then it was about probably a year or so later, I was at an event with Paul Offit, who's a big vaccinator guy. Paul, and I was heckling him a little bit. I didn't plan on it. I just couldn't help it. Like,
listen,
when someone's just like straight up lying
face,
on the stage, like I was like, yelling at, they almost took me away. But he made a point. He brought it up. He said they want to do a vaccinated, unvaccinated study, but you can't do that because of all the confounding issues. The confounders get in the way. And that's when I realized that's what they mean when they say we can't figure out a way to do that study. We can't figure out how to compare vaccinated to unvaccinated. What they mean is, clearly we've already done that study. We've just done a blanket. Let's just compare these two groups. Who has more autism? Who has more cancer? They did that. Super easy to do. The problem is it didn't come out the way they wanted.
Yeah, of course.
Clearly the unvaccinated are healthier. But what they say to themselves is, but there's other confounding issues. The unvaccinated probably aren't drinking tap water, right? But the nature of that group of people,
because,
they probably aren't walking through airport scanners. They're not eating Doritos. They're not drinking Coca-Cola. They're doing a lot of things in their life that you could say, maybe the reason that they are healthier and not having these issues. And we got to deal with the sick kids. But this, to my point, then the point you're making. So what they're basically saying is the world is about the sick people. It's about the sick people. Yes, our study shows us unvaccinated, all the things they're doing, definitely a healthier group of people. But we don't care about them. We care about those that are sick. And so we're going to inject that group. Well, we're going to poison the totally healthy people so that we can protect the sick people. And that's what pisses me off. What pisses me off is you're attacking the healthy people because they've learned to live a life. And by the way, those injections I know are destroying your gut biome. And if they get it into me and my kids, this is why I fight the fight that I fight. Stay away from my effing kids. My kids don't need that stuff. They're totally healthy. And you're trying to poison them so that we're all sick.
Well, I mean, I think it's not that straightforward.
I do. Sabine, it is that straightforward.
I know. But you got to zen. Otherwise, you're killing your own bifidobacteria. So I think, listen, it's complex. I agree with you. We should have better studies. I personally think the microbiome might be the way to kind of see. But again, vaccine is just a brand to basically divide us on a topic that's, you've got people that are unvaccinated, that are vaccinated, immunosuppressed, and people that are unvaccinated, non-immunosuppressed, and they're kind of dividing, right? It's like the strong versus the weak, and what do you do on that? I think, we need to be more inclusive of both sides and say, you know what? Freedom of choice. You want to get You want to get vaccinated. You don't want, like with COVID, I believe in freedom of choice, okay?
Yeah.
You're scared of going outside and the vaccine is giving you the ability to go outside because you're scared. Do it and keep doing it. And God bless you, you know? But here it is. If I want to take a chance on the virus and I want to go and live my life without having to worry about a pill or an injection, and I want to be as free as possible, well, freedom of choice, okay? Like, don't tell me what to put in my body. And here's the thing, you know, is as a woman, it's like, why am I, when did my body, my choice not matter during the pandemic?
I know.
Why didn't it matter?
Yeah.
You know? And that was the biggest thing that I was. Look, if I want to take a chance, I'm exposed to all these people. All these people are coughing on me. I'm still standing. Why am I going to line up to something you haven't tested that is causing some myocarditis, that is not working clearly because people are having COVID 3-4 times? And great that it works for the person that's like overweight, diabetic, never got COVID. Well, guess what? Maybe the spike protein was just not enough of a high dosage for her. Maybe in the person that's slim, in the kid, it's affecting them because of the dosage, right? The quantity that was given. So maybe we should have given a smaller dosage. Maybe we should have given one dosage. Maybe the idea of a booster every 4 months was not the idea. But here's the thing. At the end of the day, the number one ethics rule is freedom of choice.
Amen.
And we did not do freedom of choice. And the other thing we didn't do is we didn't come to the table and argue this. Because it should have been, you're pro-vax, you're anti-vax. And I don't even like these terms of pro-vax, anti-vax. Because again, it's a brand. It's like you're black or white. Well, there's multiple colors between black.
But I like how
am I really black or white? I mean, I tend to think I'm kind of,
I like how you've thought about it, though. If we can just let's get rid of those things. We're just deciding how I'm going to get measles into my body. It's just a delivery system.
That's it. It's a delivery system.
Inject it if you want. You're allowed to inject it. Go ahead. Your injection also has aluminum and formaldehyde and polychlorinated and all that. But that's your choice.
Your choice.
I'm going to go with my kids and my family. We want it the natural way.
That's it.
And so we're just choosing, the delivery system.
Yes.
My delivery system, pharma doesn't make any money off of, which is, I think, why they're so upset with me.
Here's the thing. At the end of the day, there's antibodies. You could check your antibodies. I had measles, mumps, rubella as a kid. I get to residency. They mandated for me to do the MMR.
Yeah.
Okay. They could have easily checked my antibodies.
Right.
If I had antibodies, why the hell do I need the MMR?
Right.
Right. So you're exposed to measles. You have a whole classroom of kids, and some of them are vaccinated, some of them are not vaccinated. Well, test their antibodies.
Right.
See if the unvaccinated have antibodies.
Let's start there.
Those
anyway.
are the resilient. Because guess what? They never got measles and they have antibodies. Amazing. I mean, I have kids that, I looked at the microbiome of kids that never got COVID. During the pandemic, I said, if you're not vaccinated, never got COVID, please send me your stools. That was like my big thing. And I looked at that, and those people had antibodies, but they never got COVID. No symptoms. And their guts were amazing, right? Because these are the resilient people. They survived COVID. They survived not being vaccinated. And they have a lot of bifidobacteria. Those are the people that I want as my donors, right? Those are the people that are going to save. Remember in the days of tuberculosis or the bubonic plague, right? My great-great-grandmother survived the bubonic plague. And what happened to those people? There were no vaccines back then for the bubonic plague.
Right.
So what happened? The strong took care of the weak, and the strong never got sick.
Probably got even stronger and stronger.
And they exposed themselves. So the exposure of a microbe. Think about Dr. Sidney Feingold, who lived till 97 years old. Right? He played with all these microbes. I mean, that's little by little he got exposed. So he chose to expose himself the crude way, which is, playing with poop like I do. And I'm exposed every day to different microbes, right? That's my choice, right? At the end of the day, I'm exposed to microbes. I create my own immunity. I build up my immunity. It's my choice. The farmer that's playing with poop of the horses and the cows, His choice to be a farmer and to play with that poop. And probably the reason he didn't get COVID, because I gave a lecture at Polyface Farm with Joel Salatin. And I, like you, after that podcast with you, everybody thought I was crazy. Oh, she didn't isolate. So at the farm, speaking to all these farmers, and I said, well, we isolated COVID in the stools. And they're all like, COVID doesn't exist. It's a hoax. Da, da, da.
Yeah.
So I got attacked, and I go, and they're like, you're lying. There's no such thing as COVID. All these farmers. And I stood there and I said, how many people here had COVID? And basically, like, no one raised their hands. So I go, you mean to tell me all you guys did not have COVID yet? I mean, and this was during Delta, okay? Yeah. So I took the samples of the farmers. I go, okay, well, call me up. I'll test your stools. Well, farmers have a diversity in the microbiome because they're exposed to all the cow poop and the horse poop and everything. Now, again, that's a choice. They choose to live that life. Yeah. Now, the sterile guy that's in his house, with a maid and everything is alcohol and sterile, well, that's his choice.
Right.
To live in a sterile. And if he wants to be vaccinated because guess what? He's sterile.
Might need it. There's no other way to get anything inside of this person, right?
Oh, you can live in with a sterile gut where there's nothing living in there. And as long as you don't go from the sterile gut to a diverse environment, you're fine. But if you go from sterility to diverse environment, you're going to need a bunch of vaccines, okay? And that's the society that we've created.
Yeah.
So we are giving vaccines to the person that has killed their microbiome to kind of give them back immunity little by little.
Do vaccines have a history of hurting the microbiome?
Nobody's done those studies.
No one knows.
No one knows. So
seems like an important study to do.
I would love to do those studies, especially on the MMR.
I'll call Robert Kennedy Jr. when we're done with it.
No, I think we need to do before and after MMR.
Yes.
Give me the baseline of a kid. Let me see their bifidobacteria. Let me see after the MMR if the bifidobacteria is killed or not.
Right.
If we have no problem, we have no problem. But here's the thing. What if the vaccine concept of the MMR is a good idea, right? Inoculum, giving a small microbe, attenuated life. But what if, like you said, it's the aluminum, it's the mercury, it's the other crap that we put in there. Right. So one of the things we discovered during the pandemic is that not all vitamins are created equal. So some vitamins are contaminated with metals because guess what? These factories that are making them, the copper pipes, all the machinery is old. They're still producing. So there's little pieces of copper, arsenic, whatever goes into those. So especially if they come from outside of America, we do a better job at sterilizing and not sterilizing, but making sure the vitamin is pure. If you take a vitamin that has, metals in there, you're going to kill your microbiome. Even if I'm telling you, that's why when I did my studies on vitamin C, it was important for me to have a company that I trusted. It was an American company that I trusted. I said, I want you to make me a vitamin C pure. Yeah. And then I'm going to give it to my patients to test before and after. If I had given different brands, I probably wouldn't have had the same results.
That wouldn't be a controlled study, right?
Because of the fact that we're testing different vitamins. But if I give the same vitamin, same manufacturer, and I'm seeing an increase in bifidobacteria, that vitamin is good. Yeah. But one thing that we did notice is that if you have other things in the vitamins, you're not increasing your bifidobacteria because these other things are affecting the microbiome. One interesting, I have a lot of people that come to me, right, to try to influence the products. I don't like to influence products because I try to stay within the research and try to stay as logical as possible and legitimate as possible. Although it's hard because you kind of have to bring in funding to pay the research, and this is not an easy undertaking. But one of the things that we know, one lady came to me and she bought this yogurt. She thought she had this yogurt that was amazing, full of bifidobacteria. She took it. She wants me to be the influencer on that yogurt. So I said, well, let me test your stools first to see, do you have bifidobacteria? She didn't have bifidobacteria. Tested her yogurt. The yogurt didn't have bifidobacteria. Here's a woman that invested in a company that basically thought she had bifidobacteria in her yogurt. She was sold from whoever made it out of the country. this yogurt and was told it's an amazing yogurt full of bifidobacteria. She thought she was taking it. She invested in the company. I told her there's no bifidobacteria. Guess what? She stopped with the manufacturer and started rebranding and retesting. And now she's in the right position of saying, okay, now I feel confident, and rebuilding her own microbiome. And by the way, she had cancer. So, this is
So
where
let's
we
wrap
are.
this up, because you just got into the subject I thought we were going to talk about, but we had a far more awesome and enjoyable conversation. But the news flash is you just did a study of yogurts, probably based on this. You looked at how many yogurts?
26.
26. And of the 26, how many actually had
Three.
bifidobacteria in them? Three.
Three had
And they all
adequate
had
amount
bifidobacteria
on
written
the
on.
label.
Like, so it's
Yes.
not like our yogurt doesn't use that. They're saying
Correct.
it's in there.
Correct.
And so only three. And then you also looked at pills with probiotics in
Yes.
them. And how many did you test?
16 out of 17. 16 out of 17 probiotics didn't have bifidobacteria in there. Yeah, it's crazy.
All right. So then my final question, as we sort of wrap this up then, is obviously I think anyone watching this podcast right
Yes.
now is saying, I mean, it seems like it's all happening here. You are what you eat.
All
right?
disease begins in the gut.
Right.
Yes.
And I mean, it may even be my relationships are being affected by that. And then
Yes.
And I'm assuming drinking alcohol probably.
1 glass of alcohol, they say, improves the microbiome. I think it needs to be redone, that study, with larger numbers. But, alcohol is a sterilizer. So you would expect it to kind of kill off the microbes.
Okay. So if I want a healthy gut biome, what do you recommend to people?
So if you're healthy and you've survived the pandemic and you've been doing fine and you're happy and you're in a great relationship, keep doing what you're doing. If you have a healthy child that's thriving in school, doing amazing, even though they eat junk food, keep doing what they're doing. Let them be children. Don't hover them. Don't be on top of them. Don't think about giving them probiotics, because they have their own factory of probiotics, okay? So if that's the case, just be doing that, okay? If you're a person that's basically, struggling, you've had COVID twice, 3 times, it's time to start learning about the microbiome. Read the book, Let's Talk Shit. It's on Barnes & Noble. Not that I want to shout out my book, but it does. But it does have a bunch of good recipes. It does have good education to educate yourself. There's also a lot of data out there on gut health. There's also a lot of people that do podcasts that talk about gut health. So you can kind of listen. Fermented foods, sauerkraut, vitamin D, vitamin C, zinc, vitamin B, important. All those, vitamins are important. Good nutrition, real nutrition. Food that's not processed as you're building up your microbiome. I tend to decrease salads and, blueberries, raspberries more, because they tend to be in the field and there's a lot of spraying, pesticides, microbes. So I don't know. I don't necessarily trust foods that are, in farms, even though they say organic. So you got to know your farmer.
Because you think you're getting
pesticides, and listen, there's a farm. There's a farm behind me, and they say they're organic, but then we see them with hazmats, at 5 o'clock in the morning. So, organic, but you're spraying in the morning. That's not really organic. And here's the thing with pesticides, right? That bottle has a big skeleton that says, "Do not drink this. This is poison." And now you're spraying it on all my food. Nobody's washing the strawberry or the blueberry by the time it gets to my kitchen counter to the level to remove all that poison, okay? And
right.
that's the true poison, right?
Yeah.
So I think we need to kind of cut down on all those pesticides. I was in Idaho fishing, and I was in the middle of nowhere, Idaho, and they're spraying with hazmats. And I'm thinking to myself, my God, the spray's going into the river. What is that doing to my fish? Now I'm thinking I'm in a remote area,
right.
trout fishing, and my trout is now full of insecticides and pesticides. It's ridiculous. So know where your food comes from. I think know where your food comes from, know your farmer, make sure they practice, Polyphase Farm is awesome. Joel has a great method of making sure regenerative farming is done the right way. He doesn't kill the chickens. He's making sure his chickens are healthy and in a proper way, etc. By the way, I did the microbiome of the healthy chickens that are non-vaccinated because I needed to see so that the next time, and here's the thing, right? It would be so easy to figure out what is the normal microbiome of these animals and fix them with their microbiome.
Especially with bird flu everywhere.
Rather than killing all these chickens, right? Figure out how do you fix them like we would fix a human, right? With microbiome manipulations. I mean, this is the future I want us to go. You don't have to kill the cow with Mycobacteria paratuberculosis. Treat it like we treated the humans, right? So that it doesn't infect other cows. You don't have to kill the whole pasture because one cow is sick, right? So I think we need to start getting into the microbiome. We need to I'm getting into it regardless of what's happening in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting my farmers, the beef initiative, we're joined up together. I'm starting to test their cows to get a good picture of what the cow's microbiome looks like. I think we need to start testing. If I'm going to do a vaccine study, I'm going to insist on a microbiome analysis. If they want to hire me to do a vaccine study like I've done in the past, because I'm not an anti-vaxxer, I'm okay with doing the research. But guess what? Show me the microbiome that it's safe because I have to sleep at night. And so what else? Well, decreasing stress, decrease anxiety, decreasing that fear factor, because the fear factor is really what got us into this panic mode. Think about the captain whose boat
Does fear affect my gut biome?
Fear can affect your microbiome, I think. I mean, and we need major studies to show it, but I think so. Yeah. I think, when you put yourself in a mode of anger, I've certainly seen it with me when I'm angry and, my microbiome is my Bifidobacteria is dropped.
That?
Yeah, I've tested that. Yeah. I don't fight with anybody anymore. I try not to fight, but I've seen it. Like I've seen after like a massive, anger, etc. I've seen my microbiome take a dive and now I'm like, okay, let's Zen again. So Zen, meditation, yoga, good sun, good hiking, good yogurt, good food, friends, relationship, stay away from people that are toxic, that kind of get you all upset. It's not worth it. I think that's what I recommend to people. So,
Dr. Sabine Hazan, amazing. This is so much fun.
Good.
I love that you're out there. I love that you're doing this really incredible work. And I do think as I see the headlines more and more, and then they're starting to really flow, I think you've been in the center of something. You're onto something. And hopefully we can get some real funding into that space.
That would be amazing.
All right.
That would be amazing.
Take care.
Thank you.